understanding and to right very deep-seated wrongs. But it wasn't until my first quarter in college that I realized that racism still exists, that we do not live in a post-racial society. During my first few weeks of college, I'm walking through the quad in the center of the University of Washington campus and happen upon a group of black students talking about the injustices they face daily and working through what they are going to do about it. I listen for some time. At first, I go through denial. They are just stirring things up, I think. Then I hear more about their experiences, and it sinks in. My denial turns to anger, frustration, sadness, and guilt. I was very wrong. How could I have been so wrong? How do we live in a world that pretends racism and discrimination are in the past, when the reality is that my colleagues and friends experience it every day? In classrooms, walking down the street or into a store, getting a job, basic things I take for granted are daily barriers for them. Despite having seen the entire Roots series 4 or 5 times in school from a film projector, and reading black authors from around the world, I had in my head that it was history. While the racial and ethnic injustices I learned about might still exist in other countries like South Africa, I thought, and I was taught, that they were well in the past for the United States. Today, I am still ashamed I didn't recognize it sooner. I spent the next 9 years in college sampling different courses and degrees, learning new perspectives and tools, trying to figure out how I was going to change the world and make it better. I'm still paying off that college debt, but I'm grateful for all that I learned. I studied cultural anthropology and Native American history, Black social psychology and literature, Middle Eastern history and literature, Latin American film and literature, LGBTQIA+ studies, and environmental justice. And, equally important, how change happens over time in societies when someone or a group of people stand up and work together for collective good. Then I moved to art school in New York, followed by film school in Los Angeles, to learn how storytelling can create movements and change the way people think and feel. To pay my way through school, I worked with kids who were Somalian and Ethiopian refugees, kids of parents recovering from addiction, kids without housing. I worked on research projects that studied facial expressions and empathy. And, of course, I worked some typical student jobs, including waitressing, which brings a whole other set of patience and empathy skills, and cashiering, which, due to repetitive injuries, gave me a temporary disability in both arms for about a year and left me with lifelong chronic pain. I watched films from around the world. I also spent my school breaks backpacking and camping throughout Latin America and the United States, and saw firsthand the injustices indigenous people face, the richness of cultures, and the resilience of people across our continents. It wasn't until many years later that I realized that sexism exists around me too. When I studied art and learned just how many women artists have been literally written out of history by men. At the time, Black and Latinx authors were often placed in a box called outsider art, a coded term for not being properly educated in art and not interacting with the art canon. The moment I realized history is usually written by elite white men was a big one for me. This unfortunately continues to play out in today's go-to sources for facts on the internet, like Wikipedia and Google. History is written through a biased lens, whether intentional or not, erases diverse leaders and experiences, cultural knowledge, and unique, diverse truths. It was several more years before I recognized my own experience with sexism in the workplace. It had to knock me down before I did. Looking back, I experienced pretty severe sexism and harassment in several of my early jobs, but I didn't recognize it. If you are just now awakening to racism, sexism, ableism, and other forms of oppression, you are not alone. We don't see what we don't see, what we don't want to see, what the world doesn't want us to see, until our awareness opens, and then we might begin to see it everywhere. It was several years later before I recognized the challenges faced by women with
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.